My friends, tonight I want to speak to every heart that feels the weight of a home coming apart at the seams. To every husband who sits at the edge of his bed wondering how love grew so quiet. To every wife who wipes away tears in the dark because she no longer recognizes the marriage she once prayed for, this message is for you. You may be holding on by a thread, and that thread feels like it's fraying. You may be living under the same roof, and yet living worlds apart. You may be smiling for the children, for the church, for the world, while inside you are quietly breaking. I know that kind of pain, not as an observer, but as someone who once stood in that silent room myself. There was a season when my marriage was not merely struggling, it was collapsing. Conversations had become careful, then cold, then nearly non-existent. The words we didn't say hurt more than the ones we did. We weren't fighting anymore, we were fading. And when a marriage fades, my friends, that is often more frightening than any argument. We reached a day when the future looked so dim that even hope felt out of reach. And perhaps that is where you are right now. You've tried talking. You've tried fixing. You've tried pretending things will get better, but nothing seems to change. You've grown weary, and your heart whispers, maybe this is the end. But hear me, just because your strength is ending does not mean God's strength is. Just because your story feels finished does not mean God has written the final line. On the day when I believed everything was lost, God met me not with condemnation, but with a truth. Billy Graham declared again and again across the world, God can mend a broken home if you will let Him. Those words struck me like light breaking through a storm. They were not a promise of ease, but a promise of possibility. That God who heals the sick, restores the fallen, and calls dry bones to live could reach into the wreckage of a marriage and breathe life where there was none. And I believe with all my heart that He can do the same for you. This is where our journey begins, not with despair, but with honesty, not with pretending, but with admitting the truth. Our homes need help that human hands alone cannot provide. And the God who sees the hidden places of your marriage sees you right now. He has not abandoned you. He has not withdrawn His mercy. He has not closed the door of hope. Tonight, we begin with a story, my story, your story, the story of countless couples who felt their marriage slipping away, but we do not end in defeat, because God does not end in defeat. The same God who restores hearts restores homes. And if He could reach me when everything felt broken, He can reach you tonight. My friends, broken marriages rarely collapse overnight. They don't usually fall apart with one great explosion. More often, they erode quietly, slowly, silently, until the foundation that once seemed so strong begins to crumble beneath your feet. And the tragedy is this: most couples don't notice the warning signs until the damage has already settled deep. You see, a marriage does not break because of one argument. It breaks because of 1,000 little wounds that were never brought to God. It breaks when apologies are delayed, when forgiveness is withheld, when pride is allowed to settle like dust on every conversation. It breaks when the heart grows accustomed to silence, when affection becomes rare, when tenderness becomes inconvenient. It's not the giant storms that destroy most homes. It's the slow, steady rain of neglect. Billy Graham often warned that the enemy of the home rarely walks through the front door shouting. He slips in quietly through small resentments, unhealed disappointments, and unspoken fears. He used to say, a crack in the wall becomes a collapse when the foundation is weak. And many marriages today are crumbling not because the love is gone, but because the foundation has been ignored. Look back for a moment, not in shame, but in clarity. Where did the drift begin? Was it a harsh word left unhealed, a disappointment buried instead of addressed, a hurt forgiven with the lips but not with the heart? Maybe it was busyness, maybe it was work, maybe it was stress, maybe it was just life pressing in. Whatever it was, small cracks often become great brokenness when God is pushed to the margin. Because when God is no longer at the center, the marriage becomes vulnerable. When prayer disappears from the home, peace begins to leak out. When husbands stop leading with love and wives stop trusting with grace, the union designed by God begins to weaken. And many couples don't realize this until they are standing in the ruins of what once felt unshakable. But hear this, acknowledging the wound is not the same as admitting defeat. In the Gospel of John, Jesus asked the man at the pool, Do you want to be made well? He didn't ask because he doubted the man's desire. He asked because healing begins with honesty. And marriages are no different. Healing begins when we finally look at the cracks and admit something is wrong. Tonight, I want you to know that God is not afraid of your cracks. He is not intimidated by your wounds. He is not overwhelmed by the distance between you and your spouse. The things that frighten you do not frighten Him. The areas of your heart that feel too damaged feel entirely restorable to the one who created you. So do not hide the wound. Do not pretend it is smaller than it is. Do not convince yourself that time alone will fix it. What time conceals, truth reveals. And the truth is this: marriage was never meant to be held together by human strength alone. It was designed to be sustained by divine love, by divine grace, by divine intervention. And when you recognize the wound, when you finally look at it honestly, God can begin to heal it. My friends, every marriage that begins to crumble eventually reaches a moment when the heart whispers what the mouth is afraid to say. I don't know how much longer I can do this. And for many couples, that moment becomes the turning point. Not because they finally find the strength to keep going, but because they realize they no longer have any strength left at all. I remember that moment vividly. The air in our home felt heavy, as though every unspoken word had gathered in the corners of the room. We weren't fighting anymore, and some people believe that silence means peace, but our silence was not peace. It was resignation. It was a surrender to hopelessness, not to God. We walked past each other like shadows, polite but distant, present but disconnected. And when silence becomes the language of a marriage, the heart begins to starve. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you've stopped arguing not because you've resolved anything, but because you're too tired to try. Maybe you've rehearsed divorce papers in your mind. Maybe you've imagined a life where the pain is no longer this sharp. You might be surrounded by people who think they know what you should do, some telling you to fight harder, others telling you to walk away, but none of them feel the anguish you feel when a covenant built before God is collapsing in your hands. Let me tell you what I learned at that breaking point. Human strength is limited. Human patience is limited. Human love, when wounded deeply enough, is limited. We can only carry so much. And when the weight becomes too heavy, many couples believe the only answer left is separation. But hear me, Billy Graham preached this with unwavering conviction. Where human strength ends, God's power begins. And that is the turning point of a dying marriage. Not the moment you finally figure it out, but the moment you finally admit that you cannot fix it alone. It was at that breaking point, when resentment outweighed affection, when the distance seemed irreversible, when both hearts felt numb, that I finally realized something so simple, yet so profound. I could not save my marriage in my own power, and neither can you. No amount of willpower, strategy, or self-help can heal a wound that reaches into the soul. Only God can touch the places we cannot reach. Only God can breathe life where love is suffocated. Only God can resurrect what feels dead. The Scriptures say, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Not in your confidence, not in your performance, not in your ability to hold everything together, but in your weakness, your exhaustion, your empty hands. Your breaking point is not the end, it is the invitation. Because when you finally collapse into God's mercy, He does not fold His arms and say, you should have come sooner. No, my friends. He opens His hands and says, now I can begin. It was at the very moment when I thought everything was over that God whispered the first note of hope. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. Give me what is left. And that is what God wants from you tonight. Not the version you show others, not the version you wish you were, not the version you pretend to be, but the broken, weary, empty version of yourself that you've been hiding. Your breaking point can become God's beginning. My friends, every story of restoration has a moment when the heart is confronted, when God speaks a word so true, so piercing, so unmistakable, that it cracks the hardness we have spent years building. For me, that moment came when I stumbled upon a message, a simple phrase Billy Graham had preached countless times across the world. And though I had heard similar words before, this time they did not pass by me. They stopped me. They confronted me. They dismantled me. Billy Graham said forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door of resentment and the handcuffs of hatred. And my heart sank, because I realized in that single sentence that I was holding the key, but I refused to open the door. I wanted peace without surrender. I wanted healing without humility. I wanted a changed marriage without a changed heart. I had asked God to fix my spouse, but I had never invited Him to search me. I wanted restoration, but only on my terms. And when that sentence rang in my soul, I felt the Holy Spirit whisper, the healing you seek cannot begin until forgiveness does. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is not pretending the wound wasn't real. Forgiveness is not denying the pain or excusing the offense. No, true forgiveness is surrender. It is laying your hurt at the feet of Jesus, the one who carried His own cross of injustice, betrayal, and agony, and still spoke the words, Father, forgive them. That is not human strength. That is divine love. And Billy Graham spent his entire life pointing people to that love. You see, forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a decision. A step of obedience in the dark, a choice to place the matter in God's hands instead of holding it in your own. And for many couples, this is where the spiritual battle is fought, not with fists, not with accusations, but with pride. Pride says, I won't forgive until they apologize. Pride says, I will yield when they yield first. Pride says, I deserve better. They don't deserve mercy. But my friends, mercy is never deserved. Mercy is given freely because God gave it to us first. As that truth took hold in my heart, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not instantly, but undeniably. It was as if God was saying, you have been asking me to restore your home, but you are still holding the door shut. Let me in. Let forgiveness open what pride has kept locked. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something soften. Not toward the other person first, but toward God. Because forgiveness does not begin with loving your spouse more. It begins with loving God enough to obey Him, even when it hurts, even when it feels unfair, even when your heart is still bruised. That single sentence, forgiveness is the key, became the turning point. Not because it magically fixed everything, but because it exposed what needed to change in me. And if you let Him, God will speak a similar moment of truth into your heart tonight. He will not shame you. He will not push you away. But He will confront the walls you've built and say, let me tear them down. When God speaks truth into a hardened heart, that heart cannot remain the same. My friends, once God confronts the hardness of our hearts, we come face to face with a truth many of us would rather avoid. Forgiveness doesn't begin with the other person, it begins with us. And this is where many marriages falter. We have been trained by the world to believe that healing starts when the other spouse apologizes, when they change, when they finally see the pain they caused. But the gospel teaches something profoundly different. Healing begins when you surrender your heart to God. You see, forgiveness is not first an act toward your spouse. It is an act of obedience toward the Lord. It is not born from emotion. It is born from humility. It is not powered by your strength. It is powered by His Spirit. Forgiveness does not say what happened didn't matter. Forgiveness says what happened matters, but I refuse to let it master me. As Billy Graham often declared, the first person God changes in every revival is the one who kneels. And in marriage, the revival begins the same way, with a surrendered heart bowed low before a holy God, whispering, Lord, do in me what I cannot do for myself. And when I prayed that prayer honestly, humbly, trembling, it was not my spouse God spoke to first. It was me. He showed me that bitterness had become my armor. He revealed that self-righteousness had become my shield. He uncovered the truth that I had been fighting for victory, not reconciliation. God gently exposed the places where resentment had taken root, and then He invited me to lay them down, one by one. That's where some of you are tonight. There is bitterness in your heart that has been there for years. There are words spoken in anger that you never truly released. There are memories that you revisit like a wound you can't stop touching. And part of you believes that holding on to that pain protects you. But hear this clearly. Bitterness does not protect you, it imprisons you. You cannot receive God's healing while clinging to the hurt that is destroying you. You cannot experience peace while holding grievances close to your chest. You cannot rebuild your marriage while replaying every wrong done to you. Forgiveness begins when you let Jesus touch the wound you've been hiding. Forgiveness begins when you stop asking God to fix your spouse and let Him fix your heart. Forgiveness begins when you release the right to revenge, the demand to be right, the pride that refuses to yield. And let me tell you the truth from personal experience. Forgiveness rarely feels natural. It rarely feels fair. It rarely feels easy. But it is always freeing. It always opens a door. It always softens a heart, starting with yours. Forgiveness was the moment my posture changed. Before, I had been standing on the high ground of my own hurt, pointing fingers at what they needed to do. But once God touched my heart, I found myself kneeling not because I was defeated, but because I was finally surrendered. And in that place of humility, something miraculous happens. God begins to pour His love into the places where resentment once lived. Forgiveness is not the finish line of healing. It is the starting line. It is the moment the heart stops resisting and starts allowing God to work. And when forgiveness begins in the heart, restoration becomes possible in the home. My friends, forgiveness may begin in the heart, but it is proven in the habits. It is not a single moment that instantly rewrites the past. It is a daily choice that slowly reshapes the future. Many couples expect that once they whisper a prayer for forgiveness, everything will magically fall into place. But God rarely works through magic. He works through process, through faithfulness, through the quiet steps taken when no one is applauding. Once God softened my heart, I awakened the next morning to the same house, the same spouse, the same history, but something was different. Not because anything around me had changed, but because something within me had. And that inward shift began to show itself through small, intentional acts that Billy Graham himself often described as the fruit of true repentance. Forgiveness began to look like listening before speaking. Even when I wanted to defend myself, I learned that listening is not losing, it is loving. It is choosing to understand rather than to be understood. It is laying down the armor of pride so that honest connection can live again. Forgiveness began to look like apologizing without a follow-up explanation. So many marriages stumble because apologies are followed with excuses. I'm sorry, but, or I'm sorry you felt that way. That is not apology. That is justification dressed in polite language. True apology stands without the crutch of qualification. And when I apologized from the heart, not to win but to heal, the atmosphere began to shift. Forgiveness also looked like blessing instead of blaming. I began speaking life where I once spoke criticism. Not because everything was perfect, but because God began teaching me to see the brokenness beneath the behavior. Billy Graham used to say, "You cannot love someone and judge them at the same time." And those words rang in my soul. So I practiced compassion even on the days when my emotions were slow to follow. Forgiveness looked like praying together. Sometimes in sentences, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in silence. There were nights when our prayers were awkward, strained, or fragile. But even then, God was working. The family that prays together does not become a perfect family, but it becomes a family held by a perfect God. Forgiveness looked like choosing peace when conflict could have erupted. There were moments when tempers flared, when old hurts resurfaced, when the easy path would have been argument. But forgiveness taught me how to take a breath, how to step away from harsh words, how to return with gentleness instead of fire. A soft answer truly does turn away wrath. Forgiveness looked like releasing the desire to win. So much marital conflict comes from the hunger to triumph, to prove a point, to be vindicated, to establish superiority. But Christ-like forgiveness lays down the sword. It chooses unity over victory, healing over pride. And let me tell you something. Some days forgiveness felt natural. Some days forgiveness felt impossible. But every day I practiced it, my heart grew softer and the walls between us grew weaker. Forgiveness is not the erasing of memory, it is the surrendering of bitterness. It is not pretending the past never happened. It is refusing to let the past dictate the future. It is not condoning the wrong. It is entrusting justice to God. Each day, forgiveness built something. A new tone, a new tenderness, a new trust. And though it was slow, God's grace was steady. Each act, small as it seemed, became a brick in the rebuilding of our home. And slowly, steadily, silently, God did work in days that I could not have done in years. Forgiveness is not what heals a marriage. God heals a marriage, but forgiveness is the door through which He enters. My friends, Forgiveness opened the door, but it was God who walked through it. What happened next in our home cannot be explained by personality changes, counseling, breakthroughs, or emotional breakthroughs alone. These things have their place, but what took place in our marriage went deeper than human effort, deeper than self-help, deeper than negotiation. It was the quiet, unmistakable work of the Holy Spirit transforming what we had nearly destroyed. For weeks, nothing looked dramatic on the outside. There were no emotional fireworks, no sudden breakthroughs, but something subtle began to shift. Conversations once loaded with tension became gentler. Misunderstandings once explosive became opportunities to listen with patience. The coldness between us began to thaw, not all at once, but the way winter melts into spring, slowly at first, and then all at once. One evening, after a long day, my spouse said a simple phrase that stunned me. "Thank you for trying." Not a grand apology, not a dramatic gesture, just a sentence soft, sincere, unexpected. And in that moment, I felt grace flow into our marriage like warm light flooding a dark room. That is the miracle of God's restoration. It rarely begins with spectacle, but with small moments that reveal hearts slowly being made new. Billy Graham often said, when God comes into a home, He brings change. And we began to see that change everywhere. Communication returned, not as a flood at first, but as gentle drops of honesty. Trust began to rebuild, not because the past disappeared, but because God began knitting new trust over old wounds. Laughter reappeared, timid at first, then warm, then natural, like finding something precious we feared had died. Prayer became easier because our hearts were no longer hardened battlegrounds, but soft soil ready for God's touch. And here is the truth I want you to hear clearly. We did not accomplish this. God did. We had tried in our own strength and failed. We had talked, argued, compromised, and still grew distant. We had promised each other we would do better and still fell short. But when forgiveness made room, when humility replaced pride, when prayer replaced accusation, when surrender replaced self-defense, God began to do what human beings cannot do. Only God can heal the wounds you don't have words for. Only God can soften a heart that has grown cold. Only God can restore respect where contempt has lived. Only God can rebuild trust broken by years of disappointment. Only God can breathe life into a marriage that feels dead. The Scriptures say, He restores my soul. And my friends, when God restores the soul, He often restores everything connected to it. The marriage that was dying under the weight of unresolved pain began to rise. Slowly, yes. Imperfectly, yes. But undeniably, and perhaps the greatest miracle was this. I no longer saw my spouse as the enemy. I saw them again as my companion, my partner, my covenant. The person I once looked at through the lens of bitterness, I now saw through the lens of grace. That shift alone, my friends, is a miracle. Not a miracle of circumstance, but a miracle of the heart. And hear me, what God did for us, He can do for you. Your marriage is not too broken. Your wounds are not too deep. Your story is not too far gone. The God who raised Lazarus from the tomb can raise a dying marriage from its grave. The God who restored Peter after his failure can restore your home after yours. The God who calms storms with a word can calm the storm inside your house tonight. When God is given access, restoration is not only possible, it is powerful. My friends, if you have listened this far, it is not by accident. I believe with all my heart that God has brought you to this moment because He wants to speak to your home, your heart, and your future. You may be carrying wounds no one knows about. You may feel that hope has slipped through your fingers. You may think your story is too broken, your mistakes too big, your marriage too damaged to be revived. But hear this with absolute clarity. God specializes in things that look impossible. And He has not given up on you. He has not given up on your spouse. He has not given up on your marriage. Billy Graham often said God's grace is greater than all our sin. And if God's grace can redeem the sinner, it can surely redeem the marriage. Your home may feel dark right now, but darkness cannot stop the light of Christ. Your bond may feel fragile, but Christ is the cord that cannot be broken. Your love may feel cold, but Christ is the one who breathes fire where only ashes remain. Tonight, God is calling you to open your heart, not later, not someday, but now. Not when the situation improves, not when your spouse changes, not when you finally feel the strength. Now, because healing begins at the moment of surrender. And surrender is not defeat. Surrender is the doorway to divine help. Some of you have been fighting in your own strength for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to rest in God's hand. You've carried the burden, the guilt, the resentment, the fear, and it has exhausted you. But Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Rest for your soul. Rest for your marriage. Rest for your home. Rest for the parts of you that are breaking inside. And so tonight I want to speak directly to your heart. If your marriage feels distant, God can restore intimacy. If your communication is shattered, God can rebuild trust. If your past is filled with wounds, God can bring healing. If you've grown cold, God can warm what has been frozen. If you feel hopeless, God can lift you to hope again. But for this to happen, you must take the first step. Not a step toward your spouse. Not a step toward fixing everything overnight. A step toward God. Say in your heart, even now, "Lord, I need you. Lord, I cannot do this alone. Lord, soften my heart. Lord, begin your healing in me." Because once God begins a work in the heart, He begins a work in the home. He touches the areas you cannot reach. He moves in ways you cannot see. He changes what you cannot change. If you are the only one praying, pray anyway. If your spouse is distant, pray anyway. If you feel tired, pray anyway. If you have tried and failed, pray anyway. For the prayer of a surrendered heart can shake heaven itself. Tonight, God is inviting you into a miracle, not the miracle of perfection, but the miracle of transformation. He is calling you to forgiveness, to humility, to surrender, to healing. And if you will open the door, even a crack, the God of restoration will walk into your home with grace strong enough to rebuild what you thought was lost forever. Your story is not over. Your marriage is not finished. Your hope is not dead. Because the one who holds your marriage together is the same one who holds the universe in His hand. And He is reaching toward you right now. My friends, as we come to the end of this message, I want you to lift your eyes from the weight of your situation and fix them on the one who holds all power in His hands. The story of your marriage is not defined by the failures behind you, but by the grace that stands before you. There is a God who sees the tears you've cried in secret, who hears the silent prayers you never had the courage to speak aloud, who knows the cracks in your heart that no one else notices, and He stands ready, willing, able to restore what has been broken. Billy Graham often ended his messages by bringing people to a moment of decision, and tonight I want to do the same. But this is not a decision rooted in pressure or emotion. It is a decision rooted in hope, a decision rooted in the truth that God can do what you cannot, a decision rooted in the belief that the grace that saved you is the same grace that can save your marriage. If you have drifted from one another, God can bring you back. If you have wounded one another, God can heal the wound. If you have lost trust, God can rebuild it brick by brick. If love has grown dim, God can rekindle the flame. If you have given up, God can give you strength to rise again. Your marriage does not need to be perfect for God to move. It simply needs to be surrendered. I encourage you tonight, before the day ends, before the weight of life distracts you again, take a moment with your spouse. If they are willing, take their hand. If they are not, pray alone. If they are far from you emotionally, pray anyway. For prayer is not limited by distance. Prayer is not hindered by silence. Prayer is not stopped by coldness. Prayer reaches farther than the human heart can travel. Whisper these words: Lord, we give you our marriage. We give you our hurt. We give you our failures. We give you our fear. Begin your work in us one step at a time. And trust that He hears you. Trust that He is already moving. Trust that His mercy is new every morning. My friends, God does not patch up brokenness. He transforms it. He does not restore you to what you were. He makes you into something new. He does not return you to past strength. He gives you a strength you've never known. And the love that rises after surrender is stronger, deeper, and more enduring than the love that existed before the storm. So as you leave this message, leave with hope. Not the fragile hope of human effort, but the unshakable hope of God's promise. The same God who revived my home can revive yours. The same God who softened my heart can soften yours. The same God who rebuilt our marriage can rebuild yours. One prayer, one choice, one act of forgiveness at a time. And remember this, a marriage placed in the hands of Christ is never beyond redemption, never beyond healing, never beyond hope. May God bless you. May He breathe peace into your home. May He strengthen your love, renew your bond, and surround your family with grace. And may tonight be the night a new chapter begins.